ultimately, we got to a point where we had a podcast and we were getting good at podcasting. Then monetization opportunities were created through coaching and services. Those monetization opportunities allowed us to do more episodes and produce higher quality content. That higher quality content, more episodes, created more opportunities, and then it becomes this cycle. But if one of those stops, the whole thing eventually has the potential of dying, unfortunately. Podcast Growth Nation, welcome back to another episode of Podcast Growth University, where we talk all things podcasting all the time. I hope you enjoyed last week's episode number 109, Why Calls to Action Don't Always Work. Today, for episode number 110, being a full-time podcaster is a lot different than I thought. This was actually a conversation Alan and I had. It was a short conversation we had on Next Level U, where Alan said, have you ever done an episode on the differences between what you thought being a full-time podcaster were versus what they actually are? And I said, no, that might make for a cool episode. Because I know a lot of people, not everybody, but a lot of people start a podcast, and their ultimate goal is, if I could do this for a living, eventually, that would be the best. Some people start this because they want to do it full-time, and they want this to be their career. They want this to be their job. They want this to be their livelihood. This is how they want to make money. And I was very similar to that in the beginning. And let me tell you, it is very, very different than I thought. So I figured doing an episode on that, it's a little bit different than usual, right? There's not a lot of tactics. It's purely kind of an awareness episode, but I felt pulled to do it, and I think there will be value in it because I wish I heard an episode like this at the beginning. All right, cool. Enough preamble, Kev. Get to the good stuff. All right. So for episode number 7 of it was the Hyperconscious podcast at the time. It's now Next Level U. I said my goal eventually is to wake up when I want, to go to sleep when I want, to podcast with amazing people, go to the gym when I want, spend time with my family when I want, and be my own boss. I want to be a full-time podcaster. I want this to be my career. So it was episode 7 where I said that. I think by episode... maybe by episode like 40, that was my reality. Now, in the very beginning, I wasn't doing episodes every week. I was all over the place. I was traveling for work. I wasn't taking it super seriously. But over the course of kind of like a year, I think, I ended up starting the podcast and then leaving my job to do this full time. I was going through some mental health stuff. There was a lot of other circumstances. But it kind of took me a year from when I said that to when I think it happened. I'll have to look up the date at some point. And I thought that as a full-time podcaster, you kind of just podcasted. You did your episode a week or however many episodes a week you were going to do, and that was kind of it. And the rest of it just kind of took care of itself. And that is not the truth, at least for me. I'm not saying it couldn't be for you. It depends on what you're trying to build. It depends on how you want to do it that way. But so here's the thought. If you're going to do the podcast and you're going to get to the place where you're doing sponsorships and ads, you've heard me talk about that a lot, then yeah, maybe it's different. You don't necessarily have to do a lot of the things that I'm doing on the day-to-day. But it's also probably a much harder road. So I thought you recorded your episodes and then you were kind of done. Now I have the realization that that's not what it's like at all. So this is kind of what my day-to-day looks like. And you can kind of extrapolate and we can kind of go into it. So being a full-time podcaster, out of the however many hours I work in a week, figure, I don't know, how many of them are actually podcasting? Less than a day. I do 8 episodes a week. I do 7 for NLU, 1 for PGU. So that's 8 episodes total at a half hour per episode average. That's 4 hours. So 4 hours out of my, let's say, 70-hour week are podcasts, at least for our podcast. Then I average, I think, 6 or 7 other shows a week. So let's just say it's an hour each, even though hypothetically it's probably not, but let's just say it is. We'll say 6 hours. Okay, so we're at 10 hours total of podcasting. 10 hours of me sitting on camera producing podcast episodes or being part of a podcast episode. There's still like 60 hours that are unspoken for. 60-ish hours. I probably work close to 70 hours a week. So where did the rest of those minutes and hours go? Coaching. So today, as an example, today's a good example. Okay. Today, I'm recording this on Tuesday the 30th. Alan and I had a podcast recording. So I got up at 6 a.m. I do deep work from 6 to 7:15. I go take my pre-workout. I do my mobility from like 7:15 to 7:30, 7:45. And then I'm at the gym by like 7:50. I work out until like 9, come home, shower, hang with the cats for a couple of minutes, say my goodbyes to Taryn if she's leaving for the day. Taryn's my wife. And then at 10 a.m., that's usually when my first meeting is. So today, my first meeting was with Alan. It was 10 to 10:30. We did one podcast episode. Then from 10:30 to 11:30, I had an hour. I buttoned up stuff in one of our WhatsApp groups for a social media client. So I was communicating with the team for pretty much an hour. I had a coaching call from 11:30 to 12:30 with a client, podcast client. I had a podcast breakthrough session from 12:30 to 1. I was on a podcast from 1 to 2. I was on another podcast from 2 to, 2:45. And now it is 3:15. So I refilled my water, I buttoned up some things, and now I'm going to record from 3:15 to 4. And then I have a call from 4:30 to 5:30. So pretty much today was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 meetings. And again, that's not that crazy of a day. Tomorrow is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and I got to get a haircut. Thursday is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So I have 9 meetings on Thursday. So you can see that the majority of my time spent is not podcasting. A lot of the time spent is. There's a good amount. Like I'm podcasting a lot. But the majority of it is it's business meetings. So we have a business behind the scenes, and we have department meetings. So we have chief officers meetings, and I'm leading Next Level Podcast Solutions in terms of that's like my department to make sure it doesn't fail. And I'm leading Next Level Social Media. That's my department to make sure it doesn't fail. So I facilitate the meetings of those departments. We do monthly meetups every month. I have that this week. It's the first. We have our monthly meetups the first of every month. Monday, Alan and I are supposed to record 7 episodes. We almost never do. So Monday was 11:15 until 5:30. Alan and I were together, masterminding business stuff. I was still up at 6 working up until 11:15. So essentially, I work from 6 to 6 every day, Monday through Friday. Sorry, not every day, Monday through Friday. And then Saturday, I usually work 6 a.m. until noon, but it's all back office stuff. So I usually don't do coaching calls on Saturday. I usually don't do podcast appearances on Saturday. Alan and I, if we have to record, we will. But it's usually back office stuff, catching up, making sure things are the way they need to be, prepping for the next week. But you can see how my expectation was I was going to podcast a couple times a week, and the rest of the week was just going to kind of be do what you want. Now, I'm not saying you can't get to that place. Obviously, we have very big goals at NLU, and we're trying to really grow the business and be way more than a podcast, and we already are way more than a podcast. But that dictates a lot of what I do and what I don't do. I know a lot of other podcasters where it's very similar, where, yeah, they might do an episode a week, but the rest of the time they're doing things to move the ball forward, to move the needle, to grow, to do whatever they're doing. There's a lot that goes on behind the scenes that a lot of people just don't understand. I didn't expect that. I also didn't really ever understand that we were going to have a 20-something person team. I didn't understand that. I didn't understand that we were going to have payroll every month. I didn't know that was going to be a thing. What else didn't I know? I mean, I didn't know any of it. I didn't know how many kind words I was going to get, but I also didn't know how many opportunities I was going to have to disappoint people. I didn't know that was a thing. I didn't know how much I was going to have to learn in order to get here, not only about myself, but about everything else. But I think that's the ultimate thing. If I could share anything, if I could share 3 things. 1, if you are going to be a podcaster that grows and ends up doing it full time and scaling it, and this becomes your career, you're going to learn so much about yourself. positive and negative. That's part one. Part two, you're probably going to end up doing way more things outside of the podcast than you do in the podcast. Because you've got to think. If you're going to go the route that I always suggest, which is coaching, products, services, courses, whatever. If you're coaching, that's going to take time. Products and services, yeah, I mean, you create them once and then hopefully they live forever, but it's going to take time to create that. Social media, if you're doing social media, you're going to have to do that. If you're doing your email list, you're going to have to do that. If you're doing your website, you're going to have to do that. So it really depends. It depends on, well, are you building a team? Are you delegating? Whatever. It depends on all that stuff. But those are all potential meetings. Even if you have a VA that helps you, that's a meeting every week, potentially. Or at least you're exchanging WhatsApp messages every day. So that takes time. I batch my WhatsApp every morning. And that, it depends. I mean, right now it's not bad because the teams are amazing. The NLSM team and the NLPS team are amazing. A shout out to Ron, who is the director of NLPS, and Riley, the director of NLSM. So I don't have to respond to every message that clients are sending, which I'm grateful for, but the buck stops with me. So if something needs to get done, I'm the last line of, hey, Kev, can you check on this? Or, hey, Kev, the client has a question. But there have been seasons where I would spend 3 hours in WhatsApp a day. If there's a launch happening or there's clients that something specific is happening and we need to be on top of it, I might spend hours in WhatsApp. There was a season where, this was last year, I think it was like November to April maybe, November to May, where I was doing, so I was doing 8 episodes a week for us. I was going on podcasts, and then we got one social media client who had like 10 businesses. And he said, hey, I would love for you to do some of my social medias. And then if we want, we can get to the place where maybe you take all of them over. And it was a really big opportunity. It was a great opportunity. And I said, yeah, let's do it. And at the time, we didn't really have a team on the social media department. So there was a time where I was doing 5 of his businesses. I was doing my own social media, and I think I was doing 5 other clients. I think I was doing 10, 11, or 12 social medias a day on top of everything else. So I literally had to get up at 5 a.m. every single day to make sure I got all the social media done, scheduled, and ready to go. And then I was doing all the troubleshooting if things went wrong or we wanted to boost posts or we wanted to create ads or whatever. I was trying to figure out how to do all that. And it was terrible. It was absolutely terrible. One of the hardest seasons I've had in a minute because I couldn't miss. I had to be up at 5 because I had to do the social media before my calendar started. I had to do it before 10 because if I got to 10 o'clock and I didn't have the social media done, I might not be able to do it if I'm back to back all day for the rest of the day. So it was pretty much 5 a.m. and I wasn't going to the gym because I didn't have time. It was brutal. It was absolutely brutal. We've had seasons like that for sure. We've had seasons like that. We've had seasons when it's event time, so we do live events. We're kind of on hold right now because they take so much out of us. But when it's event season, the team's flying in, we're getting a venue, we're figuring out the presentation, whatever it may be. I mean, that's a really hard time. It's a really challenging time, and then you got to do everything else. When I'm traveling, my goodness, the week up to travel and the week after travel is usually brutal.
Hey, I wanted to give my experience working with Kevin and the rest of the Next Level University team. It has been such a seamless relationship. He is so easy to work with, Kevin, and he gives you all the information you need, but doesn't overwhelm you. He's also meets you where you're at. So whatever you want to do, he'll make it work. And it's just, there's no stress, there's no drama. And everybody else that I've worked with has been patient with me because I am not technologically savvy. So they've been helpful and patient and just encouraging. And it's just been a fantastic experience. I highly, highly recommend working with them.
So I went to Scotland for 2 weeks. And Alan and I think we did 21. I did 28 episodes, I think, the week before I left. So 28 episodes in a week. Because when I'm away, the time zones are different. I don't know what the internet connection is going to be. I can't necessarily guarantee I'll be able to record. Got to make sure we have content scheduled. So that's what we did in order for me to go away. That was brutal. That was a challenge, a really, really challenging week for sure. It was absolutely terrible. But I didn't expect that. I didn't know any of that was going to be like this. So I guess this is the ultimate thought, because maybe, I don't know if there's any value in the specifics. I know people like the day in the life type of stuff. I think my life's kind of boring, all things considered, because I just kind of sit in the office and do stuff. It's most likely going to be different than you think. Some in better ways, some in maybe not so better ways, or some in more aligned ways, some in less aligned ways. Or maybe it's just surprising. I don't think me coaching is less aligned. I just think it's different. I didn't know I was going to be a podcast coach. I didn't know that. I didn't know that I was going to be going to events. I didn't know I was going to be flying to Toronto, or I'm going to... Shout out to anybody who's going to Podcast Movement in August 22nd, I think. Let me know. If anybody's going, let me know. I will be there. I didn't know I was going to be doing stuff like that. I didn't understand that. It's very hard to know. And yeah, I could have asked somebody who is doing full-time podcasting, but unless they're doing it the same way you're doing it, you don't really know. Their journey is different. Just like your journey is going to be different than mine, even if it's ultimately the goal is the same. But it goes back to the lesson that you've heard me say before, where if you want to grow your podcast, you're probably going to have to do way more stuff outside of the podcast. I had a podcast breakthrough session with someone, a really sweet couple. Just good humans, just really good humans. And they were talking about how they're getting these good guests and they're getting good feedback and they're getting all this stuff. And I said, I love all that. I think that's all supremely important and amazing. You just have to understand that if you don't start doing stuff outside of the podcast, eventually that momentum is probably going to slow down. And I said, it might not. Maybe it's going to work the way you want it to. I don't know. It's hard to say. But you got to start doing stuff outside of the podcast. Because eventually that's what's going to move the needle anyway, right? The podcast is still the most important thing I do. NLU and PGU are the most important things that I do in terms of the business. If the podcasts die, everything else does too. But just because the existence of the podcast is there does not mean the success of the podcast is there. That's the business stuff. So today, a lot of it was the business. Coaching call is business. Podcast breakthrough session is business. The call I have after this is kind of it's a potential client. I did a podcast breakthrough session with someone. No, it wasn't even that. I met someone, they asked for advice. I gave them advice. They said, what would it look like to work together? I sent them something and they said, let us think about it. And then they asked if we could do like a follow-up call. So I don't know what's going to come of that. Might be a client, might not be a client. I don't know. I'm interested to find out. So that's kind of like a sales call, for lack of better phrasing. Tomorrow, it's 1 podcast, 2 podcasts, 3 podcasts, 4 podcasts. So tomorrow, I'm doing 5 podcast episodes and a department meeting. That's like my day tomorrow. So that's all podcasting. Some days I have days that are all coaching. Some days I have days that are mostly team meetings. So it's really hard to explain because it's different for everybody. But that's the ultimate thought is, a lot of what I do is outside of podcasting, but it's for the podcast and the business. Some of the speeches I've given have nothing to do with podcasting. They're about self-improvement. They're not about the podcast, but they help the business. The speech I did in Toronto with Evan Carmichael, most of the people there are not going to listen to the podcast. It's not for them. But we ended up getting several clients. I met a lot of awesome people. I was on several podcasts as well, which was awesome. I did podcast breakthrough sessions or breakthrough sessions in general with a bunch of amazing humans. And then some people said, hey, what does it look like to work together? And then they ended up being clients. Awesome. That's great. Love it. Awesome people. A great win-win-win situation. But they're not necessarily going to listen to NLU. Maybe they'll listen to PGU. And if so, shout out to you. But that's a whole nother thing. It's really this unique domino effect of when you start the podcast, you do the podcast, and most of the focus goes on the podcast until you start getting opportunities because of the podcast. And then you have to juggle making sure you still do the podcast at the quality that you did it before, and then you juggle all the opportunities you get. And it's that forever. It's really that. You can't lose momentum on the thing that brings you the opportunities, but the opportunities are also going to help you grow the thing that brings you momentum. And it's that cycle kind of forever. That's why, could I stop coaching? Yeah. But it wouldn't work. The business would shrink, and then we wouldn't be able to do the things the way that we're doing them. I mean, we do an episode every day, so that's audio editing and video editing every day for the team. Alan and I do at least a short from each, or at least a clip from each podcast episode. And when I say I'm doing it, I'm not doing it. The team, the amazing team, is doing it. It's not me. But that costs money. So if ultimately we got to a point where we had a podcast and we were getting good at podcasting, then monetization opportunities were created through coaching and services. Those monetization opportunities allowed us to do more episodes and produce higher quality content. That higher quality content, more episodes, created more opportunities, and then it becomes this cycle. But if one of those stops, the whole thing eventually has the potential of dying, unfortunately. So it's going to be different than you think. I wish, and this is why I always ask this question of people, I always say, if I was going to give you money, what would I give you money for? What is your monetizable skill? Because that's what your podcast should probably be about, at least in some way, shape, or form. If you're doing a fitness podcast and you're a website designer, you're not setting yourself up for long-term success. Really. Because you doing something outside of the podcast is quite literally outside of the podcast. It doesn't necessarily bring people back to the podcast. At least when I'm on other podcasts, there's the opportunity, if somebody wants to listen to this podcast or NLU, they're podcasters who listen to podcasts. It's not like I'm out giving speeches on construction. At least if I'm out giving a speech, it might connect to, oh, wait, you have podcasts? Oh, interesting. One of your podcasts is about podcasting? Oh, well, there's probably stuff on there to be a better speaker. It connects more nicely, which everything kind of in the day does, but it's not podcasting. So again, hopefully this is a valuable episode. I know it's a little bit different, but I myself am surprised how my days are set up. So I assume there's got to be some value, at least in the perspective of that, where the majority of my day is not podcasting. Monday, it's all podcasting, but it's not. It's scheduled for podcasting, but Al and I are talking about business. So, okay, last thing, and then we'll go, because this is fun. It's fun for me because it's raising my awareness as I talk about it. So Alan and I were scheduled from 10 a.m. till 6 p.m. on Monday. Alan messaged me the night before and said, hey, I need till 11:15 to button some stuff up, and I actually have a coaching call at 5:30. So we'll do 11:15 to 5:30. And I was like, all right, cool, awesome. We met from 11:15 to 5:30, and we, from 11:15 till 4:30, talked about business. So for 5 hours and 15 minutes, we talked about business. For an hour, we recorded 2 podcast episodes. So just think of that. Even in that day, a quarter of it, more than a quarter of it, 3/4 of it was not podcasting. It was business. So a lot of the conversations are business. Now, we have a big business and we're focused on growing the business even more, so it might not be like that for you. But I guess a safe assumption is if you're going to do it the way we've done it, don't assume that the majority of your time is going to be spent podcasting. Just like, what's a good example? I was going to say the music industry, but I mean, how often are singers and songwriters actually writing music? I mean, they write music when they have albums. They perform when they're on tour. But there's a lot of downtime, I'm sure. Actors and actresses, probably very similar. Authors, probably very similar. And maybe that's different because you're making money from the actual performance of what you're practicing. So maybe that's not even a good example. But yeah, it's probably not a good example. Because being a content creator is potentially different. Unless you're getting paid based on the content that you're creating. So I know clients and I know people I've worked with who make money from YouTube. They get paid via ads, right? Maybe they make $5,000 a month from YouTube. So yeah, the content that they create is directly paying them. That's a different story. But it's potentially harder to get there. So that might not be the path that a lot of us end up taking. So again, I hope this was a valuable episode. I know it's a little bit different, but I think it would have been valuable for me when I decided, you know what, I'd really like to do this for a living. What does that look like? Just podcast every day and that'll be it? Sure, that's a piece of it. There's a lot of things outside of the podcast that we are doing. And last thing, there would be way more things outside of the podcast that we would be doing if we didn't have such a wonderful team. So we have a Facebook group for Next Level U that gets posted in every day. That's Amy. Amy posts there every day. We would be doing that. We have a mailing list. We send out 1 email a week, sometimes 2. Christina's on that. So there's things that are happening because we have an amazing team that we had to do for a long time in the beginning. And that would be stuff that we are still doing if we didn't have the amazing team. So I guess that's another thought process is in the beginning you do all of the stuff and then eventually you bring on hopefully amazing humans like we have that can help you, that believe in the mission, that believe in what you're doing, and then you have an hour team meeting every week or every other week. And instead of doing an hour of the mailing list, you have an hour meeting or whatever, right? And then things kind of grow that way. Any questions that come of this, shoot me an email, kevin@nextleveluniverse.com. Anything that you want more specifics on, if you want to, anything I can do to bring clarity. I genuinely want everybody who listens to this that wants to do this full time to have the opportunity to do it. I just want to make sure that your expectations are accurate because I can imagine it would be very disheartening if you thought you were just going to podcast every day and that wasn't the reality that you arrived at. So if I can help in any way, just let me know. All right. As always, if you are interested in a free 30-minute podcast breakthrough session, maybe you want to strategize. Maybe you feel like you want to be a full-time podcaster and you have no idea how to do it. I was on a podcast breakthrough session earlier with somebody and they said, you just blew my mind at all this. And I said, I appreciate it. I'm grateful. I'm grateful I was able to add value and hopefully raise your awareness to what's possible and the expectations of that. So if that's you, click the link in the show notes. Happy to hop on a free 30-minute podcast breakthrough session. I'm not going to sell you on anything. It's not a sales call. And I am just as weird behind the scenes as I am in front of the scenes. So I promise it's going to be the same thing. It's going to, if anything, I might have even more energy behind the scenes. As always, I appreciate you very much. I am grateful for everybody that listens to this podcast, genuinely. Again, this is another piece of the dream. I never thought I was going to have a podcast about podcasts. How weird is that? What do I hope for you today? I hope you're getting more clarity on what you want your podcast life to look like. Again, not everybody has to be or not everybody wants to be a full-time podcaster. No worries. If that's you, no worries. No shame in that. You love it. You want to make it a hobby? Awesome. You're passionate about it? Awesome. I hope that you're not making excuses for things that you know you should be doing. And I hope you're genuinely accurate in saying the amount of work I put in will give me the amount of X result. I hope you're accurate on that. All right, until next week, keep on crushing it, keep on podcasting, and I will talk to you then.